Welcome to Back from the Abyss. I'm Dr. Craig Heacock. Chris and I have now produced 42 episodes. It's been such a meaningful and amazing adventure. And I've been thinking about how to get more feedback from our listeners, how to connect with you guys on a deeper level. Initially, I thought I would do some sort of, survey monkey thing, but that seems so COVID-y and distant and not that much fun. So, I've decided to do a little experiment in connection and podcast feedback. I invite you to email me on my website, craigheacockmd.com, if you're interested in having a phone or video chat with me about Back from the Abyss. I'd love to know who you are, how you found the podcast, what you like, what moves you, what you'd like to see more of, what you'd like to see less of. All constructive criticism is welcome. I'm thinking that I'll pick some number of responses. I'm not sure how many yet, and I'll give each person a call. I'm actually really excited to reach out to you, so just let me know if you're interested. This episode is not like anything we've had on Back from the Abyss before. Late last year, I got an email from Ian Jaydid, a Colorado-based author, artist, and video producer, who said that he had some stories that might be interesting for the show. So I reached out to him and found, holy cow, Ian has so many stories, many of them with themes we've never explored on the podcast. So after a few phone calls, we distilled the magical mystery tour of his fascinating life into two major abyss stories. First, Ian's descent into eventual breakdown and brief psychosis after his psychonaut plunge into the realm of lucid dreaming. Then later, Ian used the African psychedelic Iboga, or ibogaine, to pull himself out of the hell of opiate addiction. Before talking to Ian, I was only very faintly aware of lucid dreaming. I thought it was some type of especially vivid dreams which were not actually meaningful or physiologically different from REM-based dreaming. How wrong I was. It turns out that lucid dreaming is an amalgam of a REM dream state and a fully activated and essentially awake parietal lobe. EEG studies of lucid dreaming prove that parts of the brain are in a REM electrical pattern, while other parts of the cortex appear completely awake with a beta-type electrical rhythm. On the subjective level, this amalgam of REM sleep and awakened cortex could account for the feeling of being not just awake during the lucid dream, but also being able to control the action and even alter the dream context. And on a medical psychiatric level, by not having the human brain go into its normal sleep architecture, with intermittent periods of full brain REM sleep, REM deprivation can lead to mental and emotional collapse.
The first experience I had was when I was about 19, and I'm 48. So we're talking, a while ago. So we're talking about 30 years ago or so. And at that time, I was a teenager. I had no background in this whatsoever. I didn't even know the word lucid dreaming, or I'd heard of the idea of out-of-body experiences and that sort of thing, which we can get into deeper if you'd like to later. But this first experience absolutely blew me away. And what happened is that, and the setup is important. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the setup. I was woken up at like 5 a.m. because I had to take my mom to work because I wanted to use her car during the day. So I took her to work early in the morning, but then I went back to bed. And that is really important because when this lucid dreaming will often happen for people when they're kind of like in a slightly awakened state, a little bit like your body has been awakened, your mind has been awakened. I had to go drive a car kind of across town, get her to work, and then I came back and then I fell back asleep. I was still tired. So my mind had been kind of in this highly focused state, but then my body was still like, I was a growing teenager, so I needed more sleep. So I fell deeply back into sleep. But then, so about 45 minutes or so after I fell asleep, I found myself in a forest and it was the most realistic scene I had ever been immersed in my life. And I had no idea what was going on. The only thing that I knew was that I knew that my body was asleep. I was fully conscious. I knew what was going on. I'm like, I know I just took my mom to work. I know I just fell back asleep. I know that my body's asleep, but this is not a dream state. That's all that I knew. I didn't know anything else. But in my heart of hearts, I'm like, something is going on here that is profoundly different. And I kind of just, and this first experience just unfolded for me where I kind of wandered around this incredible forest. It was a autumn morning, and it looked like what the land would have looked like maybe 200 years ago. Like the forest was completely overgrown and there was no, there's no roads. There's nothing, of any sort of human civilization around me whatsoever. And so when I woke up later and I'm trying to describe this experience later to people, I'm like, I had this thing happen to me, but and
But
then
you knew
when
it.
you,
You knew then it wasn't a dream,
I
at least
knew
a
it wasn't a
dream
dream, but that's
in
all
the
that I
classic
knew.
sense. Yeah.
Exactly, but I couldn't tell why. And it, of course, later as the internet wasn't really a thing. This was like 1990, and the internet wasn't really, you couldn't just jump online and start doing research. So I was kind of, my only option was to, go to bookstores and go, okay, well, what am I looking for? Am I looking, what happened? It was the consciousness, the level of consciousness that changed everything. And by that specifically, I mean that I was aware that I was dreaming, and that made all of the difference. That made that I was fully conscious, that I wasn't being strung along by the narrative of the dream state. So, in any normal dream state, whatever's going on in your dream, you are just kind of following along the storyline. You're kind of being, tugged along by a leash is the way I kind of
Hmm.
describe it. You're sort of, you take the reality as it's presented to you, right? And it doesn't matter how crazy it is. Your dreams, of course, can be whatever. Anything can happen in a dream state. You can be on another planet. You can be a different person. You can, anything can be happening and you accept it as is. And you can feel fear. You can feel pain and, your full range of emotions. But at the end of the day, with any normal dream state, you are just kind of following along with the rules of the dream. This was not the case with me. I was fully awake. I was fully present. Again, like I said, I knew that my body was asleep. I was fully aware of that.
Hmm. Did it
And
feel like you had agency, like instead of sort of
100%.
in a reactive contextual dream that you were
Exactly.
more like a first person experiencing driving things?
I could completely control everything. In fact, I was walking around this forest for this first experience. What's funny is that how mind blowing and earth shattering this was. It only lasted for a few minutes. I mean, this was only perhaps a 3 minute experience at first, and yeah, I was able to walk around. I was touching things. I was putting plants up in my face. I could feel the sun on my face. I could feel the moisture in the air. I could smell the humidity. I mean, it was insane how realistic it was. I mean, I was picking up leaves and going, oh my God, I can feel this. I can see the intricacy. What the heck is going on? Like this is nuts.
It sounds like
And
what you're describing is could also be considered by, in some contexts, like a religious experience, a spiritual experience, a almost psychedelic experience.
at that point, at 19, I had really no experience with psychoactives. I had no experience with meditation or anything related to spirituality or shamanism. My parents, I did not grow up in a really religious household by any stretch of the imagination. To answer your question, it absolutely, like, I don't know what a religious experience was. I didn't know what that meant to have a religious experience, but that is exactly what I was left with. I'm like, this was a religious experience. Like, this was the stuff that I'd heard about in holy books and whatnot, or what
Mhm.
they had been talking about in spiritual circles. But again, as I said at first, it took me a long time to understand what made this different. And but then eventually I started finding the right books. I started finding books that, there are lucid dreaming practices in Buddhism and shamanism, and it turns out that there had been people studying lucid dreaming. How much are you being strung along by the story of your life? And that's what I started learning, that there's larger life lessons to be learned here. They started kicking in almost nightly. And this, I would say, I started having these kind of intense experiences almost every night for about the next 15 years or so, somewhere around there, and some of these experiences would last sometimes 3 to 5 minutes up to several hours. And you do know how much time is passing. They've proven that pretty well in the lucid dreaming community, that your sense of time actually matches pretty closely to what's going on in the real world, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
That you do have a pretty good sense of time of what's going on in there. So yeah, this started happening constantly. So, and each experience it was almost like I was I was being taught in levels. Like I would be shown something, and it would be so intense and incredible, and then sometimes I would need a couple of days to process it, and then the lucid dreams would back off, like for a couple of days, where I was just processing, and I was just going into normal REM sleep, and during the day I would just kind of wrestling philosophically with what was going on. And then
Because I
and
could
then I would
think,
just be hit. I would just be hit for, like, 2 weeks at a time, where it was just nonstop. Like it seemed like the majority of my nightlife was filled up with just lucidity and walking into these worlds and
Mhm.
exploring them. And it was
Yeah.
a lot to take in one respects too.
Yeah, I have so many questions about this. One is that wondered if you were finding yourself wanting to be in that world even more than the regular world because it was so vivid and fascinating and unexpected. And were you
Yeah.
finding yourself drawn more to wanting to actually go to bed and be in these states than actually face sort of the day to day?
A little bit, yeah, because especially at first, because it was like, for me as a teenager when these kicked in, it's like I was a god at night, but then I was still a kid during the day who had no real philosophy, who'd still had and who was wrestling with his ego and his self-identity, and anxieties and doubts and all that kind of, all the stuff that you are still dealing with, with at
Mm-hmm.
at those younger ages. So absolutely, it became very difficult. I became obsessed, because it's like, how I just wanted to enter these euphoric realms again. It's like, and I couldn't, again, it took me a long time to understand, well, what is it about this quality? Why is this so euphoric? What is going on exactly? And, it took me a long time to understand that it was the freedom of being fully conscious without being pulled uh, by some storyline, by some context. You can completely jump outside your context. And it took me years to understand, oh, that's kind of what we're all doing all the time. We live in these tightly knit contexts during our day, our storyline that we adhere to, of our life, like, well, I gotta get up in the morning, and I gotta go to work, and then I've got to do this at home, and these are the things I'm dealing with financially, these are the things I'm dealing with in my relationships, and da, 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 da. And then, we're always looking for some reprieve, right? We're always looking to some way to escape that. And I had found this ultimate escape where my body was asleep, so I didn't even have to deal with my body, and then was in these fully conscious realms where I could do anything. And that's the thing, when you're in that state and you're fully conscious, you can do anything. I mean, you're like a god in your own little
Uh,
world. You can do whatever
yeah.
you want. And
No, you
yeah,
said
that's
I had found, Ian. You said I had found, but actually it's more like it unfolded, it was presented, it
that's how it felt.
emerged.
Yes,
Yeah, and
indeed.
so how did the younger you explain that? I mean, I could see where you think, okay, am I getting some kind of like special messages? Am I tapping into the collective unconsciousness?
Right.
Am I some sort of spiritual being? Like, because I'm guessing you're asking other people, and in general, people are saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." Like,
Totally.
what are? And so, I mean, how did you explain that?
You know, I would say that that ultimate question is still something that I would not claim to have all the answers to, of like why this, what exactly was entering my consciousness. And the best that I would say is the way you've described it, that that consciousness is a very funny thing, that at once you get through all those layers of that context that I've been talking about, once you get through all those layers of identity, once you move above all of that, that there is absolutely a universal consciousness that is really free from any limiting narrative at all. I mean, it is pure freedom. And when you are that, I would say that is your true identity right now. I would say that the best that I can describe is that that larger, that pure consciousness, that collective conscious, just sort of seeped into my life. And that's where it started with lucid dreaming. But my feeling was that it could have inserted itself into my life in a lot of different ways. Lucid dreaming was the path that worked for my ego, I suppose, because I was a very rational, I'm still a very rational kind of individual. I probably get that from my father. So there was still a large part of me that for years I was still, even though I may have not completely admitted it to myself, there was the logical part of myself that could still say, yeah, but it's still just a dream. This is still just happening at night, and I could kind of like still kind of put that away in a box during the day, if that makes sense. I could still rationalize it. But then there was also another part that knew, and I was starting to learn more and more, like there is something much, much bigger going on here. This is not simply just something that's happening during, at night in my head, especially when these experiences started moving into, as I've touched on, what we call astral projection. And when that started happening, I started realizing that I was really able to truly touch on realities and realms that were beyond my physical body. I was able to come back with information that I absolutely should not have had access to.
Here, Ian takes his lucid dreaming experience to a place where I struggle to stay with him. And I think part of this is language dependent. For certain words and phrases represent ideas that speak to our past experiences, that somehow feel congruent and true. And other words and phrases, they don't, for whatever reason. Ian uses the terms astral projection and out-of-body experience to describe how he was able to somehow transcend his physical three-dimensional body and go other places in space-time. At first he lost me, as I've long thought of out-of-body experiences as a mental or psychological phenomenon, but not an actual physical reality. Out-of-body experiences are typically catalyzed by a non-ordinary state of consciousness, such as being under the influence of ketamine, or having a seizure, or, as Ian describes, while having a lucid dream. I did, however, finally resonate with how Ian came to explain these experiences as evidence for consciousness being non-local, unified, collective, somehow able to transcend space-time. Though I still think of this leaving the body idea as a metaphor, not an actual process, I do think that it may well be possible to access the collective unconscious through various non-ordinary states of consciousness, including psychedelics.
When that started happening, and that took a couple more years for that to start kicking in, that that started really freaking me out because then I had to say, all right, this isn't just something that's going on in my dreams. This is something that is much larger. This is, I'm going to have to really start taking this way more seriously, that this isn't just a fun thing that's happening at night. I was probably, I was definitely becoming a very philosophical person at a pretty young age, for sure. I mean, by the time I was 21, I was, I was running my mouth probably more than I should have, because I really felt like, oh yeah, I'm the Buddha now, basically, right? Like I've got this
I'm the
all,
chosen one.
I've got this whole spiritual thing totally under wraps. This is, I totally understand what's going on. But then my ego would get completely pummeled with some other new experience, which just brought everything up to a next level. And I'd be like, okay,
Before talking to
sure.
you, I didn't know much about lucid dreaming, but
Mm-hmm.
I thought of it as something that was very interesting and emotionally powerful and
Yes.
compelling, but not necessarily something that had
Right.
value in and of itself, or that allowed you to access
Other
insights or
realms,
wisdom or
right?
realms. Yeah, that's news to me.
And it was news to me too. I mean, so now that's, if you're on the internet and you've got, your connections to these kind of groups where these conversations are taking place, it's very easy to find that connection right now. That was not a connection I had even suspected or ever. I had no reason to even think there was any connection between. Why would there be a connection between this lucid dreaming and what we call an out of body experience? And now, where I am now, in retrospect, it completely makes sense. Those two go hand in hand, actually. So, but what happened at first, before I understood any of these connections at all? I started, in my lucid dreams, I started, going, well, what can I do next? Because, after a while, you're kind of like a god in these states, like I said. So I said, well, where can I go? So I would go see, like, I'd go check in on my mom, or my dad, or friends and family. Just, like, well, what, can I connect with people? Like, well, what does that mean? Like, am I connecting with what my vision is of my mother in my subconscious? I didn't really know what that meant, but I thought, hey, from a psychological perspective, that might be interesting to go connect with people who I actually know in my daily life. So one of the first things I did was I went to visit, quote unquote, my mother. And at the time, I was in Muncie, Indiana. I was in college. Actually, I was working for Bob Ross. I don't know if you know who Bob Ross is, the Happy Little Trees guy who did the painting stuff on PBS
Mhm.
years ago. His studio was run out of a small outfit in Muncie, Indiana. And so my mother was still outside of Chicago, where I'm from. So she was some, 150, 200 miles away, right? So what I did is I just kind of projected myself into my home to see if I could find her, and I found myself in my living room and just kind of observing, and I saw my mother in the kitchen through the living room, and I watched her just kind of, she was like making breakfast, and I just kind of observed the scene for about 2-3 minutes. I just kind of took everything in, like, there she is. And I tried to, say something, but there was no, there wasn't any response. I didn't feel there was a real connection to what was going on. um and I kind of looked at the wall, the clock on the wall, and I looked, and I said, okay, it's like 7:20. And I kind of took uh, I observed everything that was going on, what she was wearing, and then she did something funny. She pulled these pans out from under the stove, and she dropped this giant frying pan, like, and it just, and she, I just heard her say, God damn it, that sort of thing. And I just kind of giggled and whatnot. Then I went back, and I woke up later on. So, out of curiosity, and it was just pure curiosity, I called my mom later on in the day. I said, Mom, just bear with me for a second. I said, you need to tell me exactly what were you doing at about quarter after 7:20 in the morning this morning. And as she starts laying out the details of what happened and everything, and I said, did you drop that giant frying pan underneath the stove? And she just paused, and she's like, how the hell do you know that? She's like, you're at school, right? You're in college." I'm like, "Yeah." And I said, "Mom, what were you wearing?" And she tells me what she was wearing, and the whole thing completely lined up, right? So I didn't want to hear that. I mean, I didn't want to hear that at all. That wasn't fun to me, right? That wasn't like, "Ooh, how cool." That was like, okay,
Scary.
that scared the crap out of me. Again, I'm a skeptic to the last. I mean, I really am. And I still am to this day on some level. I still said, all right, I know my mother, I know her habits. None of this means anything. This is still, I'm still going to put this under coincidence that, that I know so much about her and I know her behaviors, and I might have known, like, well, she would have been getting ready for work at this time, yada, yada. But then these continued and they just kept piling up where and they got more and more specific.
Was it, I mean, it
Go
sounds like
ahead.
it's starting to get incredibly interesting and scary. And I mean, did it start to get a little dark? I mean, to this thought
So
that you, I mean, I could see where you're thinking, okay, either A, I have sort of, yeah, special powers, or I am losing my mind, or like
right.
something is not, like, most people are not doing this. And what is, yeah, I could just imagine that this would be thrilling and kind
It
of
was
horrifying
thrilling.
at the
It was
same time.
exciting. The astral projections were at first, before I could really prove it. I would say the experience I'm laying out now is one of the first times where I'm like, okay, this is too specific. I feel like calling this coincidence is now getting to the point where that's inappropriate, and I'm going to have to start looking at this from another perspective. These just kept happening over and over, where I kept on being able to, you know, confer with other people and go, okay, this is not just, this can't be coincidence. What is the connection between lucid dreaming and this projection to be able to release your consciousness? And what I have now, and the books that I'm now writing, are all based around this philosophy that it all comes back to breaking away from the narrative that you're presented with, whatever that narrative is. And that narrative can be your daily life, but it doesn't have to be. It can be any narrative. There's something about consciousness that it seems to be drawn to storyline. We are storytelling creatures.
Mhm.
There is something about us at the deepest part of our nature. And I have a theory about why. I do believe that it has something to do with that, that storylines are essentially, they are order from chaos. Essentially, that's what we're really talking about. I mean, a story is basically just taking billions of pieces of information, right, and streamlining it into a nice, well, I did this, and then I did this, and then this happened. You see what I'm saying? It's order from chaos. And I think there's something about our attention that loves that. We love storylines. And so whether that storyline is presented to us during the day, the story of our life, however we would define the story of our life, but we can get attached to that, or we can get attached to any narrative, even, of course, at night. At night, we're kind of disconnected from our daily storyline, right? Now the body is asleep. We're not really dealing with that, but then another story can be presented to us. And that is, of course, the dream state. But it's like these narratives act almost like as a cage on some level. They restrict your consciousness to the limitations of the context that you are bound within. Once you become lucid in a dream state, your body's asleep, right? So you're not connected to your body, and you're not connected to the narrative anymore. So that is the last thread that is keeping your consciousness in a limited, localized area. So once you break away in lucid dreaming, once you become aware that you're lucid dreaming, yeah, it turns out your consciousness can do anything it wants to. So that's what started proving to me, oh, consciousness is not just something that lives, behind your eye, somewhere in your brain.
Hmm.
It's something that can extend beyond,
Hmm.
whatever that means, it can go beyond. The idea is that consciousness is not localized, and that has a lot of implications. So when I started experiencing that, that really, really profoundly disturbed me, where I started going into these states of awareness where I could sort of astral project out of my body, but then I could then be in multiple places at once. And now when I say that, you can't your our minds are so linear and so limited, you can't really probably even understand what I'm saying, because if I say that I saw things from two different perspectives, you might think of kind of like an overlay, when a movie has like a transition from one scene to another, or you might see of like something like a split screen when you're, or like when you're in a Zoom meeting and you can see things from two different screens, right? That is not what I'm talking about. I would be able to go into states of consciousness where there were two truly perfectly realized perspectives happening simultaneously,
Hmm.
not like a dissolve or a split screen. I'm talking two completely realized perspectives. And that broke me, because it's like that I felt like I broke something at some fundamental level, is how it felt. I was like, I would wake up and go, I don't know who I am anymore. Like it's like that shatters your ego at such a core level, because it's, your self identity. You like to think of yourself as being just in one place at one time. You have this idea like, well, I'm me. I'm this. You know, I'm whatever this is that's living behind my eyes. I'm in a very specific point, if that follows,
Hmm.
placed in space and time. But it turns out, in terms of consciousness, that means nothing to consciousness. That consciousness can do whatever the heck it wants to, and that really disturbed me. Though it's very disturbing to be in two places at once, it turns out. So yeah, I didn't like that.
With increasingly severe sleep deprivation, Ian descended into chaos and fear, wondering what was real and what was not. Now, we know that REM sleep is crucial for restoring emotional resilience and maintaining mood stability. And as lucid dreaming took over his nights, he began to feel increasingly unstable and disconnected from his world. It's still not clear to me what parts of Ian's experiences here were due to the transient psychosis of sleep deprivation, and which were an extreme and unusual manifestation of his lucid dreaming. Whatever the case, Ian's increasingly frightening experience speaks to why sleep deprivation has long been used as a primary form of torture to break people down mentally and emotionally.
It was those kind of experiences that actually made me pull back from lucid dreaming and whatnot. I became so frightened of these experiences. I didn't know what was happening, and I was just like, I started feeling like I was going crazy, and
Wow.
I did not have the philosophy, like we've been saying, I
Yeah.
did not have the philosophy to back this up.
I'm curious, like, again, it sounds like you're going deeper, deeper, deeper
Hmm.
into these realities, whereas you said you can hold two or more complete
Yes.
uh, awarenesses or context at the same time, and then you're saying, okay, it's getting really scary. I feel like I'm kind of breaking my brain, and you want,
Yeah.
how did you pull back? And did you have some
I
conscious
felt
ability?
No, I didn't do it on purpose. It's not like I was like, well, I'm done. I'm going to turn that button off. I'm going to flip that switch. It's like once, well, it was more of just kind of a conscious thing, I suppose, where I'm like, I'm freaked out. I'm frightened, and I didn't want to go into there was a while where I was afraid to go to sleep. And
Yeah, I can imagine.
once that started happening, they did kind of just stop. And like I said, they tapered off at around these experiences tapered off for the most part. I still have them to this day, but they're much more rare. And I've also learned there's a reason for that too. These tapered off right around, I'd say in my early 30s, somewhere around there, somewhere in that general, like, it's like these started just kind of pulling back. And it was mostly because, like I said, it's like my brain was full, I guess you could say. Like I had experienced, by the time I was, say, in my mid 30s, I had then had thousands of these experiences.
What would have led them to taper off, in your early 30s? You said like it was almost like the hard drive's full, or like
Yeah.
you've reached some kind of like psychospiritual tolerance, like you had
Yeah.
so
That's a
much
good way to
of
put it.
this
That's a good
that
way to put it.
you, yeah, you just didn't need or couldn't really process more.
I couldn't process anymore. And plus, on top of it, because some of these experiences were taking up the majority of my nightlife, I wasn't dreaming properly. I was not going into REM sleep really properly anymore. And, you need that. You really do. You still need to you can't be in control all the time. You can't be conscious all the time and be dealing with our daily life. We know this. I mean, I know I don't have to explain this to you. Dreaming is essential
Yeah.
to
Well,
us.
REM
And
REM sleep's how we
yes,
recharge our emotional batteries. It's how we restore resilience. I think of people who are REM
absolutely.
sleep deprived as heading towards breakdown, whether that's sort of
And
anxious
that's where I
panic
was.
breakdown or psychotic breakdown or manic breakdown. But
That's
if
how
you
it felt.
deprive people of REM, they will lose their minds.
And that's exactly where I was heading. I mean, there was so many times where I'm like, I can't deal with this anymore. Like this is too much. I'm not prepared for this. I don't understand what's happening. And the implications were, were so profound. I didn't know how to conduct my daily life anymore. I didn't know where to go from there. And, so I went from being the loudmouth, like, yeah, I've got everything under control. I'm basically the Buddha now. I got this all under control, to just going, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I don't even want to tell the stories about this anymore. This has just freaked me out. And I pulled back completely.
It's almost as if your journey there in your 20s to early 30s with lucid dreaming sort of paralleled what happens with almost with addiction or a lot of substance use, that it's exciting and vivid at first, and it can take you to places you haven't been, and it's this thrilling journey, and then it starts to get more and more intense, and it can eventually get to the point where it's too much. Like you're not getting, the negatives outweighing the positive. You're not getting the benefits. It's starting to get scary. And for you, as you described, like a fundamental process of your brain, REM sleep was not happening, and you're realizing, okay, I can't keep doing this.
So on the physical level, my solution to that was opiates. As you talk about addiction, I mean, once I found opiates to me, it's like it was the perfect answer in many ways. As you were saying, it's like it seemed like the perfect solution. I was for minor surgery, I was first given some Percocet, and I absolutely adored it. It's like Percocet gave me the nice, fuzzy, warm numbness that it's like, it's like I had been living my life like kind of like an exposed nerve, if that makes sense. It's almost like that's how it felt. It's like I was just this exposed nerve that was absolutely aware and conscious all the time. Like I couldn't even get any sleep, right? And then I found opiates, and oh my God, I could suddenly go into this nice, comfortable, fuzzy, warm womb, right? And I could sleep. And opiates, I would sleep, and it was perfect. I would sleep for 10 hours, and it was fantastic. That's what opiates were like. So I I I turned into a huge addict. I got to the point where, in the like I think I had mentioned earlier that when we were talking before, that I was never a non-functioning addict, but but it certainly wasn't a good thing where I was, just, once you start on an opiate addiction, it's not like you can just set it aside. It's kind of like, that thing will be tapping on your shoulder every day going, yeah, well, what are you going to do? You better find a solution to this. So I eventually went from Percocets and I realized that was too unreliable finding any sort of Percocet supply. And I started just making my own, and I got addicted to opium tea, and it turned out that at the time, that's not really the case anymore, but at the time, getting the resources to make opium tea was really quite easy and really very inexpensive. So I started creating my own opiate elixir, so to speak, and I was on that for years and years. So that sort of was my solution, I guess you could say.
It was a solution until it wasn't.
Until it just got to the point where, okay, I'm just, I'm opiated out, and I was not feeling anything after a while, where I realized, like, it does something not just to your physical body. I mean, opiates have all sorts of weird things where I wasn't really feeling my emotions properly anymore. And I was, after a long time, I was missing the lucid dreaming after a while. I kind of felt like the opiates did kind of serve their purpose, really, on some weird level. I mean, they did what I wanted them to do, but then, it got to the point where I couldn't say no to them. So I had to, after a long time, I'm like, all right, I need to get off of this. This is not a lifestyle I can continue with. So I eventually found solutions to that as well through another hallucinogen. It turns out, ibogaine. I did ibogaine. I dosed myself with the African root Iboga, and that helped tremendously. It didn't fix the problem, but it helped tremendously.
Yeah. Tell me about the process of how you decided to go down the Ibogaine road, how you prepared for that, what that actual experience looked like.
So I started doing research online. I started going, all right, well, I was always a researcher. I always had the brain on me. So none of this was ever done unconsciously. I understood what an opiate was. I understood that we have opiate receptors, and I started understanding, okay, well, how do you get off of this? What is the best way to do this? And I had touched on withdrawal a few times where I just had run out of my supply of opium or whatever, and I knew that was really unpleasant. I mean, withdrawal was just so, it shuts you down that can shut you down for a couple of weeks. And I had a job. It wasn't even something I could do. I'm like, I can't just withdraw for 2 weeks, and try to maintain, and go to work. So I had to find some other solution.
I think Ian downplays here the utter hell of opioid withdrawal, possibly because of the gut-wrenching intensity of his Ibogaine detox, as you're about to hear. Still, it's really important to understand why Ian would have chosen a detox option, which necessitated many hours of nausea, vomiting, delirium, hallucinations, and obtundation. Opioid withdrawal is day after day after day after day of unbearable fatigue, diarrhea, nausea and depression and restlessness and unending insomnia. The withdrawal syndrome of any drug is always the opposite of its primary pharmacological effects. Opioids catalyze a profound sensation of inner emotional warmth, an energized euphoria, a disappearance of fear, and the near complete resolution of any physical or emotional pain. Thus, the opioid withdrawal syndrome, in addition to its horrific physical symptoms, creates a psychospiritual withdrawal characterized by feeling absolutely alone, completely vulnerable, emotionally raw, with utter elimination of any remaining emotional resilience and confidence and sense that the world is ever going to be okay. Given this unimaginable option, Ian chose a different, though much riskier path.
I was just doing research, like, oh, okay, what does this look like? And it looked like from what their information was is that ibogaine is really weird. It is a psychoactive, but it does appear to snap into those opiate receptors, and yet it's not an opiate, and it stays there. It will snap into your empty opiate receptors, which is again where all of your agony comes from. That you've got these starving opiate receptors that aren't being filled with opiates when you're going through withdrawal, but ibogaine snaps into that. It seems to be a chemical that fits itself into that, and it will stay there for they think it would stay there for about 30 days or so, and then it sort of drifts off. So on the chemical level, it's like there's a perfection to ibogaine. Now, before it starts sounding like I am just singing the praises of ibogaine, I'm just simply speaking about on a chemical level. What it does chemically, it is amazing. I mean, it's exactly what you'd want. If you want to get off an opiate, and you are willing to, kind of go through a little bit of withdrawal and the agony because you're basically you're replacing all of those opiates in your brain with this other chemical, and it stays with you for weeks, and you purge really heavily during this experience. I mean, and it's a psychoactive, like I said, so you are in a hallucinatory state, and you are purging and very heavily, and
Yeah.
the whole experience lasts about 16 hours or so.
So how and when did you decide after that process of research that
After I had enough,
it's time to do this?
yeah, once I had enough information in my belt and I felt I understood it, I did all of the math for my body weight and everything else, and I said, okay, I'm doing this. And so basically, what I did is, I stopped taking the opium tea for about 24 hours, and I kind of waited until the point where I would be looking for like another dose, right around that time where I'm like, all right, I'm starting to feel uh, unpleasant, right? And that's right about the time where you take, and I'm using two different terms, and this may be confusing to people who have no familiarity with this. There's Iboga. Iboga is just the raw root. Okay, that's just what, and I cannot remember the exact. There's the Latin name for the root out there, but then they can isolate it just like you can isolate anything. You break it down to its active constituents, and that's what you call ibogaine. All right, so there's Iboga and then there's ibogaine. So what I did is I first started with a small dose of Iboga, just the natural root, and the idea is that you just take that at first just to make sure that you're not going to have any like an allergic reaction to it or any kind of weird, some sort of crazy reaction. So I took Iboga at first, let that settle in for a couple hours. I felt pretty comfortable. You do this on an empty stomach, so things were kicking in pretty fast. And then I took the rest of the ibogaine, which was the concentrated, the isolated version of that. And what you do is you have to lay down. You have to go into some room. I brought fluids and I brought a bucket because I knew I'd be throwing up, and you dim the lights, and no one was with me, and I was living alone at the time. I had just gotten out of a relationship, and I said I didn't want anybody around. People knew. I had told some close friends and family. I said, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing this to myself. I was pretty open about my addiction to a few of the closer people in my life, and they knew I'd been researching this stuff, and so I had people on if I needed to contact them on my cell phone, I could have, but I felt confident that I could do this alone and I could get through it. And, I mean, I did get through it, but I would say that it was still an absolute mistake. I should never have done this alone. I was not prepared for how incredibly powerful the experience was. And maybe I took too much. I mean, it's possible that they gave me too much for my body weight. That was not that wasn't the math that I had done, and they agreed. I had other people who distributed this stuff who said, this is the correct dosage. So
Yeah. Can you run us
it's
through
rough.
like how that experience felt, what you experienced mentally, physically, emotionally, how that evolved over the hours and days?
So the first thing that was really frightening was that it drains you of your energy, and I had heard that. I had done the research, but I didn't really know what that meant. I'm like, okay, so you're going to be tired. It's not like you're tired. It's like it does something to your body where all of the energy, it's like my energy just seeped out of my muscles and just evaporated, and moving became difficult. That freaked me out because then I realized, wow, I'm kind of trapped in my bed. Like I really couldn't move very well. It does something to your body. I still don't really understand that exactly. I don't understand
Like you were
the.
incapacitated.
It was like you're incapacitated. I mean, it was like my muscles barely worked. Don't get me wrong, I could get up and I could get some water and do basic things. But then on top of that, not only does it rob you of your energy, it does something to your equilibrium that I compared to like seasickness, but it's like seasickness times 100. So, and this is why when people do this in a professional settings, and there are this is actually legal in several countries like Canada and Mexico and Germany. This is of course not the United States because we're always behind everything. Where when this is done in a professional setting, you wear an eye mask and you do this in a completely almost a completely dark room. Well, now again, I had heard this, that you would get nauseous, that you'd get kind of like a seasick feeling, but I was not prepared for how intense this was.
Mm.
All I had to do, I still had some light coming in through my window because I started this at around 11 in the morning or so because I knew I'd be dealing with this for the next 17, 20 hours or so. So I started this, earlier in the day. Just the light coming through my room, if I turned my head too quickly at all, just from the little bit of light coming through the shades, it's like all of my vision would just become a swirling, nauseous mess of wave and color. And it was horrible. So all you can do is just lay back real still and just let it do its thing. And then you just start throwing up. And I can't tell you how many times I threw up. I must have thrown up a dozen times over the next 20 hours. I was nauseous. I was sick. I couldn't move.
Were you scared? I mean, you're alone and
I got pretty scared, definitely, but it was still not it was still following the basic pattern of what I had researched, right? So I didn't like go, okay, I wasn't really a point where I felt, man, I'm not going to call an ambulance and I kept thinking like, if I called some sort of medical professional, what are they going to do with me? They're not going to really know what to do. I had a feeling they're not educated with this thing that I just took. And so I guess I felt that I wasn't totally confident that even the doctors would really know what to do with me in this state. And so I decided to just to just kind of go through it. And it was rough. There were a couple of times I had to go to the bathroom. The bucket was absolutely not enough. I mean, I was purging, I had to go, and I was urinating constantly. So it got to the point where I had to go to the bathroom, and the bathroom in this apartment that I was in at the time was literally 15 feet away from my bedroom door. And to get there I bet it took me about a half an hour to get from my bedroom to my bathroom. And I'm talking, I had to crawl slowly on my hands and knees slowly so that I wouldn't throw up again, so that I wouldn't jostle my body too much. It's like, God, just thinking about it, it's like it's bringing back nightmares. It's like your whole body is beyond nauseous. And it's like if somebody
this sounds possibly worse than opioid withdrawal.
But the thing about it is that the idea is that it's almost like you're doing 2 weeks of withdrawal in one day. That's the idea, is what you're kind of doing. this went on. I mean, and then of course you're hallucinating on top of it. And again, I'm experienced with with hallucinogens. The hallucinogen part did not really bother me. I was fine with that. I mean,
Yeah, what's happening mentally and emotionally? So physically, as you said, you're sort of crushing two
so
weeks, 3 weeks of opioid withdrawal into one just
right.
hell period. But
Yeah, so you're
what's
just
happening in your
visions upon visions, and that were just like all very metaphorical. As I had mentioned before, like I had kind of imagined myself for the longest time, like, oh well, I've got all this under control. I'm like the Buddha, right? No problems. And so some of my visions were like seeing these old Buddhist statues like covered in like drenched in a swamp, like they were just filthy, and they were slowly emerging out of this filth and muck and this like this black tar, all the toxins and whatnot were like slowly pouring off of these statues of Buddhas and whatnot. So I'd see stuff like that.
was any of the content important? It sounds like it was a really powerful detox that I want to
It was.
hear in a few minutes what were the results of that, but the actual, the emotional, mental content of that session, was that
Uh
important during or after?
it was not like there was a specific vision that that was really like, oh, that's a metaphor for something. It was more of a general sense of, because of what was happening, what I had done to myself, and then I'd isolated myself in my apartment, and all of this crazy stuff was happening. I was overwhelmed with feeling of just isolation. I was overwhelmed with isolation.
Mm.
Also on an emotional level, and that was really, really difficult. That was difficult on an emotional level, that I was just dealing with this huge sense of feeling alone and separated from everything. And of course that went back to everything that I had been dealing with as well, not just from the opiate addiction that I had kept quiet for the majority of my addiction. I kept quiet. I didn't mention it to anyone, but also just from my experiences, from all the experiences I'm telling you about with, as exciting as this lucid dreaming and the astral projection, as exciting as that might sound from an outsider's perspective, all of that stuff really does isolate you. I mean, it really does isolate you from your fellow man, that you can't really, it's, again, most people cannot relate. Most people are just like, that sounds crazy. And, they look at you like you're either full of crap, you're either lying, or you're crazy, or, I mean, none of their reaction, none of it adds up to anything good, right? It's all one option or another. That none of it comes down to taking your story at face value if you have no experience with that. So that's what I was kind of wrestling with, is just the isolation. And then, but you know what? Slowly, by the time the night went through, and by the time it was like 4 a.m. the next day, my energy slowly started returning. The nausea slowly started wearing off, and I was kind of like that exposed nerve again. And even though I was not withdrawing, like I said, it does tap into those opiate receptors, and I felt that it did that. I was not going through that kind of withdrawal anymore. So I had gotten past that, but you know, for the simple fact that you're not on opiates anymore, that in and of itself is rough, even without withdrawal. You know what I'm saying? Like, just the all of my that exposed nerve sensation came back in full force again, and my lucid dreaming immediately kicked in, like 300% immediately. Like, so, like, the next several days, my lucid dreaming was just off the wall intense, which I was fine with. I mean, I had the experience with it. I was okay with that, but I had to kind of relearn how to deal with just not being on opiates again.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't recommend it without total supervision from a medical professional.
Yeah. So is it
There's my
fair to say what the Ibogaine experience did was um, sort of fast forward the awful opioid withdrawal, sort of
Yes,
concentrate
yes.
it, but it didn't fix the problem. It didn't change your life. It didn't change the psychological longing or dependence per se, that you still, then in the days, weeks, and months afterwards, you still had to do the work of.
Absolutely.
figuring out how you're going to live without opioids.
How am I going to live with it, and how am I going to deal with it psychologically? And luckily, again, by that point in my life, I had learned how to meditate. And that is, I would say, if there's one thing that has been the lifesaver in my life, even more so than any of the lucid dreaming or the projection or any of my crazy experiences, I would say that I learned how to meditate at a fairly young age, and that was a godsend that I learned how to do that. So my meditations helped me so much. When they say you're an addict forever, I really am. I mean, I'm not on opiates anymore, but occasionally I will take what's called kratom.
Hmm.
Kratom is how it's actually apparently pronounced, is what uh, Hamilton says on Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia on Vice. But kratom is something I'll take occasionally. But like right now, I've not had kratom in like 2 weeks. It's like my relationship with opiates has changed forever. There's not the desperate need, but anytime I'm around anyone and someone even mentions, "Oh, I've got some Percocet," my ears immediate will prick up and go, "Oh, really? Do you have perhaps two Percocets?" I mean,
Hmm.
that's probably just how my life, it's how it is. It's just what it is. So, yeah.
So where are you now today after, I mean, you've been through some powerful experiences in your 20s with lucid dreaming
Right.
and yeah, and tapping into this sort of non-local consciousness, and then this whole other phase of seeming like finding opioids as kind of a spiritual salve and a way to
Right.
power through and continue your creative process. And that worked until it didn't. And now, post both of those experiences, where are you today?
So today, now I've kind of taken all of these experience and more that of course we've not even had time to discuss, but I've taken all of these experiences, and I've been kind of bringing them all together. They have started to unify and gel into one larger theory. And this really started, I really started this deeply around 7 years ago. And I started writing a book. It was a book that I had a story that had been brewing in my head. God, possibly forever. I had a story kind of brewing in the back of my head, even since I was a little kid, and it's evolved so much over the years. And I finally started writing this thing down. I said, I'm going to start writing this this book. I want to write this story, and that's what I started doing. And it was fiction. Basically, it was taking all of my crazy experiences, everything that I had dealt with, from the lucid dreaming to the spiritual kind of aspects of it, to and even the rougher stuff, my demons. I took all of it and I poured all of this into this book, and that was my first novel, Tripping the Field. I found an indie publisher out of Oregon who was willing to not change any of it. There was a lot of people who looked at it, they're like, well, I don't want to have so much drug use in the book, or I don't want to have so much discussion about religion or certain things like that. And so I kind of had to turn them away. But I found a wonderful publisher out of Oregon who took my book as is. And so then when the book was published, I kind of started doing like radio shows and podcasts where I would kind of talk about the book. And then what I didn't expect was that naturally people would ask me like, hey, this is a crazy book that you've written. This is a wild adventure that deals with, psychedelics and quantum physics and all this nut stuff. Like, where did you get the inspiration for this? So then I kind of started talking about this stuff again for the first time in years and years. And as I started talking about this again, and through writing that book, I started, all of this stuff started to really gel. Well, it's not like it started to gel. The reality was that it had gelled, and I just wasn't aware of it. I'm like, oh, wow, all of this stuff has really been gelling for years. And I've really walked away with a very unified theory of everything that's going on. So now I'm in a place where I can speak about this stuff. And so now when I come across a problem in my life, or any of my tendencies towards whether it's addiction or depression or anything like that, I can see it through this larger perspective. I can see it through this, this unified theory of how consciousness works. Like as we were talking about earlier, this larger perspective of consciousness.